What a great weekend of fights. UFC 280, one of the best cards of all time. I mean, we say that almost every other card now, but there seems to be some reality to this. So what are some life lessons we can take from UFC 280? Well, for one, you got to take into consideration that everything is temporary. One day, you're going to be one of the top guys in the world, and then the next day, you're not. One day, you're hot. The next day, you're cold. 1 minute, you're in the prime of your careers. Next minute, you're falling apart on the verge of retirement. So this is the reality of combat sports. Let me give you guys some history on the UFC's 155 division. Who remembers TJ Grant? This guy is a Canadian mixed martial artist. By the way, he's only 38 years old, right? But by the time he knocked out Gray Maynard almost a decade ago, which was May of 2013, he was out of action for one reason or another. Now, the reason why he had to retire when it was Ben St. Henderson who was the champion, and it was at the time where basically Pettis was going to take that championship opportunity from him because he got injured right after the Gray Maynard fight, or something happened to his medical conditions to where basically he just was not able to compete anymore. And you got to think to yourself, this was one of the hottest prospects, one of the hottest guys to come out at the 155 division. He was 21-5 right after he beat Gray Maynard, and he was on a run where he had a decision over Evan Dunham, Carrillo Prater, Shane Roller, and then he had that decision loss against Ricardo Almeida. Now, that was maybe around the 170-pound division, and then he moved down to 155 and just started starching guys like Gray Maynard. Even Gray Maynard himself, you look, he gave Frankie Edgar one of the best championship fights in his career, and look what happened to him. It's just the reality of the game. So you look at Charles Oliveira, he had a hot run. He took out Chandler. He took out Tony Ferguson. Right after Tony Ferguson got taken out by none other than Justin Gaethje, of course. But the reality is that this is just the course that you take and the trajectory that happens in your life, and especially in a very demanding sport such as MMA. So now you got to think also the same thing with TJ Dillashaw. You look at what happened with him. He had his arm, his shoulder busted up, which is very interesting, right? Considering that like him and Aaron Pico, who's a teammate of his, had the same type of injury. So one can only speculate, is it the way that they train at their facilities? Is it the way that their trainers, nutritionists, and whatever type of people they have around them to prepare them maybe lacked in that department for one reason or another? Or maybe it's just part of the reality of the game, a game in which everybody feels pain to a certain degree. Everybody is going to get hurt because it's bone on bone. It's constant, like pressure on your joints. And then on top of that, you're also taking head damage on top of the other bodily harm that you could potentially do to yourself. So it's a very demanding sport in the training, and it's also a very high impact sport in the competition and in the training and sparring in and of itself. So one can only speculate that the window of opportunity that you're going to have in this sport is very limited. So this is a reason why you have to think to yourself, you know what, TJ Dillashaw did something very negligent to the fans, in which that he did not inform everybody of the fact that he had an injury. However, you got to think to yourself, the guy is about to be 37 years old, and it's very old in the lower weight classes, which is why I mentioned in a past podcast why Prince Nassim retired early in his career as one of the best 125 champions of all time. So that's the reality of it. TJ Dillashaw knew that if he did not take this fight, he would not have any opportunity later down the road. So he had to do what he had to do. Now what comes next for Islam Makhachev and Aljamain Sterling? Perhaps maybe you would see Henry Cejudo come out of retirement. That would be fun. Here's something interesting. I was watching a Netflix documentary about the U.S. basketball team called Redeem Team, right? Where they basically won back the 2008 gold medal in the Olympics for basketball, in which in other times they just continued failing because the team just wasn't there, or it wasn't, the right competition for USA team. Well, nonetheless, there was in one scene in the Netflix documentary called Redeem Team, where they were basically touring around the Olympics of Beijing in 2008. And they had Henry Cejudo in one of the highlights carrying the American flag after he won the gold medal. So I thought that was interesting. And it shows you the type of star power that Henry Cejudo has going on. So you would think that someone like Henry Cejudo, who's in this documentary in Redeem Team about the U.S. basketball team, watching him, watching his greatness, watching all the things that he was able to do and accomplish for America, the way that the Redeem Team was able to do for themselves. I mean, you got to think, like, the guy has notoriety. He has respect in the wrestling community. He's well known in the hardcore MMA fan base, but the problem is he's just not a draw. So it's going to be very hard to get him out of retirement and then get him to fight somebody who has been active in terms of the way Aljamain Sterling has as being a champion. He just went 5 rounds with Peter Yan, dominated him, and then did this to TJ, which was a bit of an easier fight considering that TJ was injured. So what about Islam Makhachev? What's next for him? Well, what's next for him is that now he has an opportunity to become the pound-for-pound number one greatest fighter of all time, or the greatest pound-for-pound number one fighter in this generation, because now he could do it against Volkanovski in his own weight class. However, fighting Volkanovski in his own country. So I think that Islam Makhachev, maybe he will be a little bit too big for Volkanovski, or perhaps maybe we will really find out why Volkanovski is ranked the number one pound-for-pound guy in the world. But nonetheless, they have a plan for Islam Makhachev. They want him to take on the number one pound-for-pound guy because they already beat the number 2 guy, which is Charles Oliveira. And now they want him to fight Volkanovski, the number one pound-for-pound guy. And then after that, sky's the limit for him. And what it seems is like there's only a couple of people that can really handle Islam Makhachev. And Arman Tsarukyan seems to be one of those guys. So he gave him a very tough 5-round fight, or I'm sorry, not a 5-round fight, a 3-round fight. And he was one of the guys that can go tit for tat with Islam when it came to the striking, when it came to the grappling. I'm talking about the Armenian fighter that basically fought Islam in his UFC debut and lost. But obviously you've seen the career trajectory that Arman has right now, and the trajectory that Islam is at right now fighting for greatness, fighting guys outside of division. Now, after that, suppose he does beat Volkanovski, what comes after that? Well, the reality of that, perhaps maybe Leon Edwards, because as you know, Leon Edwards was known to have trained with Islam Makhachev, and Makhachev has held them down in practice during one of the sparring sessions they had in AKA. So that's going to be a very interesting trajectory in the way that Islam goes if he decides to move up a weight class. And I could see him perhaps maybe letting that be the last fight of his career if he was to somehow win against Leon Edwards in in some kind of unification, or maybe a fight against Khamzat. Maybe they're not going to do that. But how about this? Here's another interesting news. How about Khamzat and Abu Bakr getting into a fight at the UFC 280 in cage side right after Islam Makhachev won the fight? So here's my speculation. There's a lot of speculation that goes on with the fact that, like, let's say Khabib and his team are not very Ramzan Kadyrov fans or some way. And you could say that, well, how is it that he was able to meet him or this and that? Yes, there's a reality of that. There's a reality of the fact that Khabib has met him. Even Ramzan Kadyrov gave him a Mercedes-Benz as a gift after winning the Conor McGregor fight. He even went and visited him after Khabib visited Putin. But the reality is that there's a lot of tension between the Chechens and Dagestanis, and perhaps that could be a part of it, or perhaps maybe there's just a lot of testosterone flowing in the air. Maybe there was a lot of miscommunication going on, but you've seen in the end, they all got together in Abu Dhabi. They got into a little dinner. They made a little speech, a public speech for the world to see in a video. And then they even had Ramzan Kadyrov FaceTime Abu Bakr and Khamzat holding side by side, basically piecing it out. So there's a lot of things to speculate in this brawl and why it happened, but from what it seems to be right now, they seem to have solved it, and that is the only thing that we can really go off of. But we can't ignore the history that the Chechens and Dagestanis have, perhaps the possible tension that Khabib has for Ramzan Kadyrov. But then in the end, you've seen that they made up, but then it looks like there's a lot of duress that comes with that. So I think that's I think there's a lot of interesting layers to that story, to which we can speculate one way or another. I want to read to you before I head out, because I'm gonna basically sign out soon. I just wanted to drop a few things on life lessons of UFC 280 and some of the interesting things about it. I want to read to you what Will Harris, the photographer and the creator of An Enemy of a Fighter, what he wrote about Charles Oliveira in his latest social media post. And it quotes right here: "The man in the arena. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by the dust, sweat, and blood, who strives valiantly, whose errors and comes shorts again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcomings, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasm, the great devotion, who spends himself in worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of a high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly. So that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." And I think that Will Harris quoted this from either Theodore Roosevelt, I believe. So yeah, I think that's something that you got to understand. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to slag off Charles for losing. This happens in every fight. Imagine what happened when Prince Nassim lost to Barrera, because of the fact that Prince Nassim was just a very, very cocky guy back in the days, and they wanted to see this guy fall. And then after that, he basically took that heavy loss. But then, of course, in the end, he went and retired with a win. And that's really what matters in the end, is that how you see yourself and how you see your career and how you see your efforts. Because you know what? It is true that it's one of the greatest shames in the world for not being the type of guy to go out there and take a risk, to find out what you're really made of, to find out the limits of the realities in yourself, the realities of what you're capable of and what you're limited by. We have to know these things. So to all those guys that go out there that dare to be great, you got to give them all the props in the world. This is what Charles Oliveira did. And by the way, this is nothing new that Charles Oliveira has faced in his career. He's lost before, but so has Islam Makhachev. This is something that Khabib has never faced. However, this is something that both Islam and Charles Oliveira have faced, which I think in the long run, perhaps maybe could make them better fighters than Khabib in terms of being well-rounded, in terms of learning how to deal with adversity when you lose, and then you have to go home with that loss, that long plane ride home, that long car ride home, and then having to ponder on the fact of what you could have done and what you couldn't have done. But then in the end, you just got to say to yourself, you know what? I did something most people are not willing to do. I went out and dared to be great. And you know what? I think that is the greatest appreciation that you can give to these guys, and the best respect that you can to any fighting man that goes out there and tries their best to become one of the greatest ever. Because if you're not here to be one of the greatest ever, what's the point of it? Motivation is everything. And when you have the right motivation, my goodness, it creates the type of fireworks that you saw at UFC 280. That's why they call it the theater of the unknown. Enjoy the fights.